It is so cliché to say, "You won't find my town on any map," but it is true. My town is one of those middle-of-nowhere places. We are not directly off an exit or main highway. Reaching our city limits requires several obscure turns on unpaved roads. You won't find any signs directing you our way either. Besides delivery or service people, there isn't much outside traffic. The dense thicket of trees surrounding my town makes for even more isolation. My community lives differently from most. No, we are not Amish, however, we maintain a simple way of living. The founding fathers of my town roamed the earth hundreds of years ago. As technology grew and developed, many wanted to evolve with the times. However, our wisest forefather, Alexander Stone, knew these new ways would lead to corruption and the downfall of man. So he took charge and excommunicated those who sought to lead the community to hell and renamed the town from its previous Granville to Stoneville. His descendants continue to uphold those values and ways of living even now in the year of our Lord, 2029. A little over a decade before I was born, it was decided to take a few small steps into the modern era. In addition to the most basic creature comforts, our town elders have remained steadfast in their mission to honor and uphold tradition. There are many spoken and unspoken rules of Stoneville, but the most critical rule is that absolutely no one is to enter the woods. The only exception to this rule is the annual trip our elders make with our yearly offering. We hold a fear-based respect for the ancient grove. Every winter solstice we have what is called the Festival of the Forest. It is a time of drinking, feasting, and dancing. A maiden of the wood is crowned during the ceremony. She must be a young, pure woman who has come of age, meaning turned 18, within the same year. While being crowned Maiden of the Wood sounds lighthearted and joyous, it is anything but. Once the maiden is selected, it essentially becomes a farewell party. After saying their goodbyes to family and friends, the town elders escort the Maiden of the Wood into the forest. Along with baskets full of crops and handmade items, the group disappears into the void. The elders always return at daybreak the next morning. Just the elders. No crafts, no crops, no maiden. Every year on the Sabbath before the festival, we are told the history of how, since the founding of Stoneville, the elders have been making sacrifices to the forest god to protect our town and bring abundance to the community. Drymus, the forest god, came to Alexander Stone in a vision. He showed him the demons that lurk in the woods that surround our home and told him of how they hungered for human flesh. He vowed to protect our people in exchange for the yearly offering of the soul of an innocent on the cusp of womanhood. Her pure blood would ward away these abominations and replenish the soil, guaranteeing a fruitful harvest the next year. He wanted the people to celebrate the occasion with food, drink, and merriment. Thus, the Festival of the Forest began. Growing up as a young woman in Stoneville, we are constantly told what an honor it is to be chosen as maiden. You are becoming a part of something much greater than yourself, they say. Your family will be blessed beyond measure in the next year, they tell you. I have spent my whole life believing this to be true and silently judging the tears of sorrow from the chosen ones and their families. Even last year, when my sister's best friend and our neighbor was crowned Maiden of the Wood, I couldn't believe that her family seemed so broken by the decision. You would think such a devout family would be rejoicing at the favor shown upon them. I couldn't understand their reaction. Until now, my sister Grace was chosen. It's been 1 week and I still haven't fully processed it. But that's mostly because, well, she's back. At daybreak, the elders didn't return like they usually do. It was only my sister. Completely unclothed, covered in dirt, mud, and what looked like blood, she stumbled through the mist toward the waiting crowd. Gasps of terror spread like a rogue wave. Papa quickly stepped forward, removing his jacket to cover her exposed body. He swiftly ushered Grace, Mother, and myself through the silently parting crowd and toward our home. She hasn't spoken a word since returning. She doesn't eat. She doesn't sleep. I haven't even seen her use the facilities. Mother bathed her when we returned home, but you can still smell her. It's a stench that I can only describe as rot. A putrid, sweet musk that seems to permeate our entire home. Grace just sits and stares. That is, until Papa prays over dinner or Mother sings her hymns. She gets squirmy then, like little bugs are crawling on her skin. She covers her ears and rocks back and forth. Wednesday night she started hissing as Papa blessed the food. And yesterday she struck Mother as she sang while tidying up. The long, clawed nails Grace has grown since returning left marks on Mother's face and drew blood. My parents ignore all these developments, but I see their concern and fear growing just like the crowd that stands outside our house every night with their torches and rifles. They want answers that we can't provide, and I can tell from the vicious chanting and sounds of the ramming of our front door that they will not wait any longer. I fear for what is about to come. However, my fear isn't for them breaking in, it's for what they're breaking out. The village of Cold Harbor was a forgotten place, tucked deep into the English countryside where the roads twisted like veins through the moors. It had stood for centuries, its stone cottages weathered by time, its churchyard filled with the nameless dead. Few visitors passed through, and those who did rarely stayed after dark. I arrived on a bleak October afternoon, the sky swollen with storm clouds. My reason for coming was simple enough. I had inherited an old house on the edge of the village, a relic of my mother's side of the family, whom I had never known well. The solicitor's letter had been curt. The property known as Cold Harbor Manor is now legally yours. No further explanation. No mention of why it had remained unclaimed for so many years. Cold Harbor Manor stood at the very edge of Ashdown Forest, past a grove of twisted yew trees that clawed at the sky. The house was vast and solemn, its stone facade blackened with damp, its narrow windows staring like the eyes of a blind man. I was met by the housekeeper, Mrs. Henshaw, a woman in her 60s with a face like old parchment and a voice like dried leaves rustling in the wind. "It's been empty a long time," she said as she led me inside. "Best you don't go wandering about after dark." "Why?" I asked, but she only shook her head. The interior of Cold Harbor Manor was even colder than the autumn air outside. The corridors smelled of old wood and damp stone, and the gas lamps flickered in protest, as if resenting my intrusion. The house had the unsettling quality of feeling too large when I was alone in a room, yet claustrophobic whenever I moved through the corridors, as though the walls were pressing in. The first night, I heard footsteps. I had just extinguished my bedside candle when I became aware of it. A slow, deliberate tread moving across the upper landing just beyond my bedroom door. The house had been silent all evening, save for the distant sound of the wind threading through the trees. Now, something was moving. I lay rigid, listening. The footsteps were measured, almost rhythmic, but they did not descend the staircase. Instead, they stopped directly outside my room. I held my breath. The door handle did not turn, nor did I hear any further sound, yet the oppressive sense of something on the other side of the door remained. I wanted to call out, to demand who was there, but my voice died in my throat. The silence stretched until my skin crawled. Then finally, after what felt like an eternity, the footsteps retreated, slowly at first, then fading entirely. In the morning, I found Mrs. Henshaw in the kitchen. She was pouring tea, her hands steady, but she avoided my gaze. "There was someone in the house last night," I said. "No," she replied simply, "but I heard." She set the teapot down with a clatter. "You heard him." I stared. "Who?" "The Watcher." She exhaled through her nose as if she had been holding the words inside for too long. "He's been here longer than any of us, always watching, always waiting." I felt a chill creep up my spine. Waiting for what? She gave me a long, hollow look. For someone to stay. That evening, as dusk swallowed the village, the fog came rolling in from Ashdown Forest. It was thick and low, curling around the house like a living thing. I sat by the fireplace, nursing a glass of brandy, telling myself that I was being foolish. A house settling in the night, a trick of the wind, nothing more. Yet, as the clock in the hall struck midnight, the footsteps returned. This time I did not wait for them to reach my door. Candle in hand, I pulled it open, only to find the corridor empty. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone and something else, something faint, metallic. Blood. The candlelight wavered. My pulse hammered in my throat as I stepped out onto the landing. The air was wrong, heavy, as if I had stepped into another time. The walls seemed darker, the wallpaper curling at the edges like burned parchment. Then, from the end of the corridor, I saw him. A figure, half lost in the shifting fog, stood motionless at the far end of the hallway. Tall and thin, dressed in black, his face obscured by shadow. His posture was unnatural, rigid, as though he had been standing there for centuries. Watching, I could not move. My breath came in shallow gasps as the figure took a slow, deliberate step forward. Then another, and then nothing. The candle flickered wildly, and in that brief moment of darkness, the figure was gone. I did not sleep that night. By morning, I had made my decision. Cold Harbor Manor would remain empty. Whatever haunted its corridors, the Watcher, or something worse, belonged to the past. I packed my bags, left the keys on the heavy oak table, and did not look back. As I walked into the village, the fog lifted slightly, revealing the churchyard. I paused, compelled by something I did not understand. There, among the weathered tombstones, was a single grave apart from the rest. Its stone was cracked and ancient, the name barely legible beneath the moss. But as I stepped closer, I could just make out the inscription, Edmund Blackwood, 1712 to 1773. He watches still. A tremor ran through me. Blackwood. The name was familiar. I had seen it in the solicitor's letter, buried among the legal formalities. Edmund Blackwood had been the original owner of Cold Harbor Manor. I turned away from the grave, my breath hitching. The fog had thickened once more, swallowing the village in a dense, choking mist. And just as I stepped onto the road, I heard it again. Footsteps. Not behind me, not ahead, but all around. And this time, they were getting closer. Grandma died with dignity at the age of 94 the other day, surrounded by her loved ones. So I don't get why she's come back. She was waiting for me when I returned from the hospice. Outside, by the door. I barged by her, or through her. I was so discombobulated that I don't know which, and went in. She didn't follow me, just stood by the door. I think she can't come in. I'm certainly not about to ask her. I don't understand why she's doing this to me. She lived a full, respectable life, and she was a catalog of aches and pains that I can't begin to list. She chose to die freely and openly, after lots of discussion. Well, some discussion. I told her about the option, you see. The medical staff in our region aren't allowed to raise it with patients, after some scandal about homeless or disabled or mentally ill people being pressured into it. I forget which. Some local busybodies took to the press and made a huge fuss, and the sanctimonious old geriatrics who run this place quickly put a fuck-ton of extra rules in place. But there's nothing to say that a loving grandson can't gently talk about the option to his suffering grandma, especially since grandma has a nice house and I was forced to live with my parents. It's the economy, stupid. Until grandma moved to the hospice and someone, I forget who it was, suggested I might as well move into her house since it was lying empty, and she has all these plants and it can be sorted out later. Oh yes, it will be sorted out. It's later now, and I put the plants out by the pavement the second day. I don't have time to waste on plants, they were dying anyway. Grandma looked at me as I told her, her eyes bright and unclouded. She was wearing a very pretty lacy blue nightgown. It looked expensive. "Thank you, Nicholas," she said deliberately. Mom told me about her decision later that day, struggling to hold back tears. "She wants us all there, Nicholas, singing her favorite song, Auld Lang Syne." I resisted the urge to roll my eyes at the attention-seeking old bag. Everything went well. Grandma closed her bright eyes. I was out of there. My parents agreed I could stay in her house until we sort things out. Honestly, I don't think they enjoyed having me with them either. She was there when I returned home. I genuinely thought it was just a random old lady in a blue dress standing by the door. Then I went up, she turned to me, and I froze. She opened her mouth, and I saw very clearly the gaping black hole. I heard her voice, very deliberate and slow. "My plants, Nicholas." The hole grew wider and wider and moved closer to me, starting to swallow me up. I unfroze and barged in. She's still there, standing. I know I can move past her if I move very fast. And I know she's not going anywhere, and neither am I.